What is happiness? An inquiry into ends, goods, and fulfillment. Across differences of temperament, culture, historical situation, and personal circumstance, human action nevertheless converges upon a single final end, that is, happiness. This end is articulated through a variety of idioms: success, fulfillment, meaning, peace, but such variation conceals a deeper unity of orientation rather than a genuine divergence of aim. Human beings act under the presupposition that their actions will, in some determinate respect, render their condition better ordered, more complete, or more worth affirming. Even actions later judged mistaken or destructive are undertaken under the appearance of contributing to a fuller life. The fundamental difficulty, therefore, is not that happiness is insufficiently sought, but that its nature is persistently misconstrued. This confusion arises when the objects of desire are mistaken for the ultimate end of desire. We pursue things that appear to promise fulfillment and treat them as if they were fulfillment itself. These goods present themselves as ends in their own right, inviting pursuit as though they were self-justifying. To clarify this error, happiness must be defined prior to its pursuit. Whatever qualifies as happiness must exhibit a form of completeness that leaves nothing essential outstanding, sustains itself without reliance on external conditions, and remains stable rather than vulnerable to fluctuations or loss. Goods that fail to meet these conditions may still be valuable or desirable, but they cannot constitute happiness in the strict sense. Improvement and completion are not identical. A common identification of happiness is wealth. Wealth appears to promise self-sufficiency, understood as the elimination of need and anxiety through possession. Financial security seems to offer independence from vulnerability and constraint, yet wealth, rather than dissolving dependence, reconfigures it in new and often more complex forms. Money requires protection, management, and continual increase, binding its possessor to economic systems and external circumstances beyond individual control. Moreover, accumulation tends to intensify the fear of loss. A good whose preservation depends upon conditions external to the agent cannot be self-sufficient. Wealth therefore fails precisely where it claims to succeed. Happiness is also frequently associated with honors and distinctions, titles, offices, public recognition, and social esteem. These are pursued under the assumption that acknowledgement confers genuine worth. Honors function as markers of social perception rather than as sources of moral excellence. They often expose a disparity between appearance and character, revealing that social status does not guarantee virtue or wisdom. Praise cannot transform vice into virtue, nor can recognition supply meaning where it is absent. Genuine worth must be intrinsic rather than conferred. Honors shape reputation, not being. Power represents itself as another plausible candidate for happiness. Power promises security through control, the capacity to shape outcomes, impose one's will, and preempt harm. Yet power depends upon obedience, enforcement, and fear. Those who possess it must guard against rivals, betrayal, and reversal, often surrounding themselves with protective measures precisely because they are vulnerable. Authority requires continual maintenance and defense. A condition sustained only through constant reinforcement cannot be genuinely secure. Power offers the appearance of control while deepening dependence on unstable human arrangements. Fame and glory suggest a more enduring form of happiness by promising survival beyond one's lifetime. To be remembered appears to grant a kind of immortality through continued presence in the mind of others. Upon examination, however, this promise proves fragile. Fame is limited by geography, culture, and time. What is celebrated in one context is unknown in another. What is praised in one era is forgotten or rejected in the next. Even the most prominent figures are eventually obscured by the passage of time. Reputation fades as reliably as physical existence, introducing the further reality that one effectively dies twice, once in body and again when remembrance itself dissolves. Remembrance cannot substitute for fulfillment, nor does recognition constitute being. Pleasure represents perhaps the most immediately compelling account of happiness. It offers intensity, immediacy, and relief from discomfort, requiring no justification beyond the experience itself. Yet pleasure is transient and episodic. It is shared with non-rational animals and frequently produces dependence when pursued as an end. Pleasure dissipates quickly and leaves behind dissatisfaction or the compulsion for repetition. Rather than unifying a life, it fragments experience into isolated moments. Pleasure may enhance life, but it cannot serve as a stable foundation for happiness. One might object that happiness does not reside in any single one of these goods, but in their combination. A life that includes wealth, honor, power, pleasure, and recognition may appear complete. Yet what is unstable in its components cannot become stable through aggregation. A collection of contingent goods does not yield self-sufficiency. Multiplicity does not generate unity. If each element remains dependent on fortune and circumstance, their sum remains equally dependent. Happiness, if it exists at all, must be fundamentally unified. If none of these external goods satisfies the condition of happiness, then happiness must be redefined at a more fundamental level. It must be a good that cannot be taken away, diminished by circumstance, or rendered precarious by the passage of time. It must possess an internal unity rather than existing as a fragile assemblage of parts. It must sustain itself rather than drawing its significance from conditions beyond the life that seeks it. Any good whose value depends upon continued possession, recognition, or favorable circumstance remains exposed to loss. No possession, status, or sensation meets these requirements. Happiness must therefore consist in the highest good, that is, that which grounds all other goods, rather than standing alongside them as one more object of desire, subject to competition and contingency. To speak of a highest good in this sense is not to introduce another item into the catalog of things one might pursue, but to identify the principle by which pursuit itself becomes intelligible. Just as particular actions derive their meaning from the ends they serve, so too particular goods derive their value from a more comprehensive orientation of life. The highest good functions as the horizon within which other goods acquire order and proportion, granting them intelligibility without competing for their place. When this horizon is absent, goods fragment into isolated aims, each demanding allegiance while offering no lasting satisfaction. Accordingly, the highest good does not enter a life as a possession comparable to property or status. It orders a life through alignment and orientation. Happiness takes shape as a condition of participation in what is genuinely good, structuring the whole of one's existence rather than adding itself as an item to be acquired, stored, or accumulated. This distinction is crucial. Acquisition implies external addition, while participation implies an internal ordering. Happiness emerges as a life becoming integrated around a coherent center, through which its various elements find order and proportion. Concrete examples clarify this point. Two individuals may possess comparable wealth, professional standing, and social recognition, yet differ radically in their degree of happiness. One experiences these goods as provisional and anxiety-inducing, perpetually threatened by loss or comparison. The other experiences them as subordinate to a deeper orientation that gives them place and measure. The difference does not lie in what they have, but in how their lives are ordered. Where the highest good is absent, even abundance produces restlessness. Where it is present, even scarcity can be endured without collapse. The same contrast appears in adversity. Consider those who endure illness, exile, or material deprivation. Some experience such conditions as the total negation of life's worth, while others retain a sense of purpose and coherence despite severe external loss. This is not because suffering is intrinsically desirable, but because happiness, when grounded in what cannot be lost, is not exhausted by external circumstance. What is threatened in misfortune is comfort or opportunity, not the final end by which life is measured. To the extent that a life is ordered toward goodness itself, toward unity rather than dispersion, coherence rather than contradiction, sufficiency rather than insatiable desire, and truth rather than illusion, it participates in happiness. To the extent that a life remains disordered, fragmented, or reliant on externals for its justification, it falls short, regardless of how favorable its conditions may appear. Happiness is thus approached through orientation and integration rather than accumulation, through the shaping of a life rather than the amassing of goods. This understanding carries decisive ethical implications. If happiness is identical with the good, then virtue is not a mere instrument for achieving happiness, nor a strategic means to a separate end. Virtue is the lived expression of a life rightly ordered toward what is most real and most enduring. To live well is therefore not primary to secure favorable external conditions, but to shape one's character, desires, and actions in accordance with what cannot be lost. Fortune may alter circumstance, impose hardship, remove comforts, or disrupt plans, but it cannot directly affect happiness itself when happiness is grounded in the highest good. A good life may suffer externally without losing its end, while a corrupt life may prosper outwardly and yet remain internally deficient, driven by anxiety, dependence, and instability. The contrast reveals that happiness is not a reward appended to virtue, but the form of life that virtue itself embodies. Although the vocabulary and social forms of desire change across times, the underlying error persists. Wealth continues to be pursued without true sufficiency, power without genuine security, fame without lasting meaning, and pleasure without fulfillment. The modern world multiplies opportunities for acquisition while leaving the fundamental orientation of life unresolved. The question therefore remains unavoidable and perennial. Are we pursuing happiness itself or merely its imitations? Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye.